are we doing something inherently dangerous to our children, to society, to our in fact humanity, and the human civilization, where we have created this situation where our children are not identifying as binary? Does that mean that there will be a dramatic reduction in procreation? Maybe. Does that mean that the religions that do procreate and outlaw uh, homosexuality are going to procreate more and take over? What does it mean? Is that's my question, right? Like, so what does that mean for the future? So if we fast forward 100 years, does it mean that this particular generation is the bridging, right? Because we see a lot of increases in autism and Aspie. Is that just a higher way of thinking on a different brainwave, where maybe we're going to get to the point where we can actually communicate telepathically, and this is just an evolutionary jump, and we're in the transition of the jump? Like, I mean, literally, I can go all sci-fi. My whole point is there's so many questions. And the only thing that I see politically is accusations, shame, blame, pointing fingers, and a refusal to let the other side win at any cost. Nobody's exploring the questions or the why. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And like for many, many years, I've always felt like we're not addressing the elephant in the room. Like we keep addressing the symptoms, the effects, but not like what's causing all of this imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that um, our generation is responsible because we've had a lot of changes in our lifetime, technologically, and the way that we communicate and the way we relate to one another. And I find that we're not as connected with one another. And, we're about instant gratification. And we have so much luxury and freedom that we create these problems for ourselves that aren't always like the best ones to try to solve, if that makes sense. Because, like, when we're bored, what do? We create challenges. But then I think there's also an aspect of it where um, everybody wants to feel special, and we are all special, and we all are unique. But people, especially children, aren't getting that acknowledgement enough. This is my theory, obviously. I don't know, this is just from my observation and my own experiences. And it's like parents don't parent the way they used to. And this is, I'm sure this happens every generation, but it's like, it's number one reason I decided to run for president. Like 20 years ago, when I first knew I was going to run, before I ever told anybody, I had, I don't know how to explain it, like a dream or a vision where I saw that I had to go to that place because I had to influence our values. Like I recognize, like growing up in very abusive circumstances in my life and just experiencing a lot of discrimination from the time I was in preschool. Like I always wondered, like, why do people treat people the way they do? Why do people hurt each other? And I recognize it's our values. So ultimately, like everything that's going on in the world and especially in our country comes down to our values changing, and they aren't necessarily changing in a healthy direction because like balance is the key. And if we're going to these extremes, we're creating disease within ourselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and then it's coming out into the world versus like trying to live more balanced lives. But like the thing I struggle with is how do you sell essentially personal responsibility? How do you make personal responsibility sexy so that people like want to like learn to understand themselves, learn to understand how nature works, like observe patterns and recognize like what we're capable of and what we can do and create together. Like if we just held ourselves personally accountable. Like there's just so much to what you shared that like I hope that what I reflected back to you made sense, like where I'm coming from, because I find like I get what the solutions are, but I don't get like how to implement them.
Watching. That was my whole thing: personal responsibility and self-reliance. Before we can get to a self-sovereign society, we first have to get rid of the victimhood. We have to get rid of the idea that it's always someone else's fault and someone is always here to save me. We have to stop that. We have to get back to the old west, okay? You literally live in the middle of nowhere. You have a gun, you shoot your own food. Personal responsibility, self-reliance, right? Personal responsibility is you don't just randomly play with guns because it's cool and accidentally shoot somebody. You train your children how to use a weapon. You take responsibility for things, and you learn enough that you can become self-reliant, and you know how to fish, you know how to hunt, you know where to get water, you know how to start a fire, like the things that you need to basically survive. Those things are different nowadays because, generally you're not going to have to build a fire unless you're going to be a survivalist. I do suggest that everyone go to prepper school at some point, just in case. Zombie apocalypse. I mean, come on, we almost had it. We almost had it a couple of times there. Like we avoided it, like, oh, almost. So you never know. It's always a good idea to know how to start a fire and land a plane and drive a big rig. I don't know. Have you watched Terminator T2 a few times? Right? Skynet. Just saying.